Hello and welcome to Building Africa's Prosperity. I'm Chris Bishop. In tonight's episode, we put the spotlight on what the Development Bank of South Africa is doing to support economic recovery through programs and interventions in South Africa and the SADC region. My guest today is a man with a very tough job right now, Chuene Ramphele, the Group Executive of the Infrastructure Delivery Division of the Development Bank of South Africa. He's also the chairperson of DBSA's Covid-19 response team. Just to start off with, before we get into the main body of it, you heard what President Cyril Ramaphosa said this week about easing the lockdown. What was your reaction to that?
Thank you so much, Chris, for this opportunity. I think, as we had the president yesterday, obviously, countries are faced with tough time, but I think what the president actually did yesterday is actually then beginning to take the risk-adjusted approach towards ensuring that we start to open the economy gradually. I think the tough thing is basically maintaining the balance between ensuring stricter measures as well as trying to unlock the economy. But I think it's the right step in the right direction in terms of beginning to try and unlock the economy, which is already stressed. So I think, in my view, I welcome the president's approach and the cabinet itself, and I think it's a right step in the right direction to start unlocking this economy. And I think obviously it's important to save jobs now. Because we can see that they have been shed at an alarming rate. It's important to then begin to inject some sustainability into the businesses that has employed our people. And I think that's very important to just even making sure that we start unlocking the livelihood of our people. So I think for me, it sounded so responsible of government to do so. And I think we just have to then continue urging that the stricter measures of observing the COVID-19 protocols are done. So even though it's a very difficult exercise, I can associate with that.
But you're out on the ground working with people during this COVID-19 lockdown. Just one quick question on that. I mean, a lot of people out there are still worried about this second spike that people are still talking about.
Yes, I think it's actually the worry of everyone, and I think. But if you look at it, it's even during lockdown, you go into the townships, you start realizing that people are just conducting business as usual, and that's why it was placing pressure in terms of how do we enforce, compliance in that regard. But I think we should understand to say, I think for me, as long as we put the lives of the people in the front, I think that becomes much more important. Obviously, it's a very difficult exercise, like as I said, to maintain the balance. But surely, I think once we start to see what's happening in this level 3 of the lockdown or level 3 of the restrictions, maybe in terms of what the president has announced yesterday, we would maybe see some improvement. And I think that would also then have to give another intelligence in terms of how best to then do we have to manage whatever the consequences that it may emerge as a result of such kind of restriction, of such kind of easing of restrictions. Because you try and solve one. What I've realized with COVID is that you're addressing one risk, it actually brings 4 other risks that you need to really be in a position to deal with.
Now, as I said in the intro, you've been out there working on the ground. How is the DBSA helping the government during this COVID-19 crisis to try to ensure that service delivery and life goes on?
Yes, Chris, thank you so much. I think the DBSA, obviously before even the COVID around March, as an organization, we actually took a bold step of even beginning to want to ensure that we safeguard the lives of our own staff, just starting from our own staff. And we started pushing for working from home strategy that we have employed at that time. At the time when the lockdown was coming, it was already then implemented by the DBSA as a leadership in terms of ensuring that the staff work from home, and then so that we can start planning on how we then assist the government in responding to the COVID. But what framed our intervention, obviously, as we're thinking of it, was a number of priorities. One, we thought, look, let's be strategic and focus on anticipating and managing the health crisis. And there we deliberately chose to deal with issues around the diagnostic and the testing and the isolation phase, as well as then beginning to look at the infrastructure on the ground. The second area that we really preoccupied ourselves with was basically the priority around anticipating and managing the impact of the COVID on the economy. And that I will unpack in terms of what we really are doing in relation to that particular process. So as the DBSA, obviously, we felt, look, one of the hard-hit areas is the municipalities at that level. But we firstly said, look, what we must do, we need to really look in terms of how we support, in the National Disaster Management Center. The National Disaster Management Center is basically one of our, one of those tools that have been utilized by the government in terms of response and ensuring that at least there is a coordinated effort in fighting the COVID itself. So the DBSA has committed about 150 million to these initiatives to support the government of the country, including SADC. We also remember as the DBSA, we have the Development Bank of Southern Africa. We also then take care of the SADC region as our interest. So we again then thought, look, it's important to amplify the provision of mobile screening and testing units in the country, because one of the impediments is that the testing was not ramping up because of the capacity for the testing. So as a result, the DBSA put its investment around, supplying most of the municipalities in the 7 provinces of the 9 provinces of the country with screening and isolation pods. The isolation pods is just to say, once somebody is screened, we then put in, and we find that there is positive or suspicion of infection, then you are able to then pull those people into those individuals into the isolation pods. And that is basically in support to the provinces in relation to the pandemic, to the fighting of the pandemic. The third thing that we've done. Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, what is the most difficult thing you're facing on the ground as you do this?
The most difficult thing we're facing on the ground is basically the non-availability of services. I mean, there's interrupted, basic services on the ground. So one, for sure, if you look at the issue of water, much as we are saying to people, we need to really then be in a position to wash their hands, we have a challenge generally of the access to water. And that's why part of all of the initiatives needed to really be in a position to take care of these aspects. Chris, what we do, obviously, we also are in the construction, or rather the implementation of the infrastructure in a practical sense. This is the infrastructure we're implementing in the communities. So what you find there is that when then you have the lockdown, there was really nothing that was happening. And in that regard, so that's why the schools have been affected, because we are building most of the schools, we are renovating most of the schools, we are really building most of the hospitals, we are renovating most of the hospitals, we are doing most of the industrial parks where most of these economies, township economies, are taking place. So one of the most difficult things is that by that time, you don't have access to services. One of the key issues is that we also have lack of access to energy, in some of these communities that we're really working in. And that is primarily part of what is actually bringing the difficulty in the manner that we really have to implement some of these interventions.
And do you think Africa does have, there's been a lot of talk about it over these months of lockdown, whether or not Africa does have the capacity to handle not only this pandemic, but others that are sure to follow? What's your view on that? Yeah,
truly speaking, I mean, it's a fact that Africa is constrained in relation to the capacity to actually respond. And I think the COVID has tested us in terms of our ability to respond, especially, feeling it in the healthcare services. Our healthcare system surely, proved that it cannot necessarily respond adequately to the needs the, or to the pandemic itself. So as a result, I think we have to admit that we have to recalibrate as countries and starting to collaborate in terms of beginning to develop such kind of a capacity to then especially prioritizing the health, to ensure that even the future pandemics of the future, pandemics that will really be hitting, one of these countries, we're able to then be in a position to respond. I mean, you have heard that we don't have ventilators. Most of what we do, we're importing, and this importing, obviously, due to the restrictions, had really had a very negative impact in terms of our effectiveness of the responses that we really do. So it's very clear to say we have to recalibrate as the African community and start trying to say, how do we then begin to gradually develop this capacity? Obviously, it's not going to be an overnight issue. It's going to really be something that will take us some time. But at least if we then put our plans together, I think that can really help us to respond effectively to actually win the issue of uplifting our economies.
Now, in the early weeks of the pandemic, I was covering the World Health Organization's briefings on Africa. And I can remember quite clearly at the start, they said it was just a handful of laboratories in the continent to try to deal with and test for COVID-19. Now, we're here in SADC, we've got the National Health Laboratories to cope with the pandemics. Do you think they're up and ready to deal with everything? I mean, we're talking about other large-scale diseases as well, like TB, HIV, chickenpox, etc. Do you think that they're up to the task?
Certainly, Chris, they are trying. I mean, we have, analyzed that situation and realized that there is still a lack or a gap in terms of the capacity, and I think that has been admitted obviously to say we need to amplify the capacity, especially of the National Health Laboratory Services, in order to up the testing. If you look at in the beginning, as you rightfully said, you could see that there was slow take up in terms of the numbers, because there was actually not much of the testing that was really happening. Hence, as the DBSA, we felt that it's going to be important to partner with the CSIR, which is the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa, to then be in a position to then look at investing in the capacity for testing, and hence we have put our plans together, which are in motion now, of actually trying to push to test about 20,000 samples a week, which basically then increases the capacity of the National Health Laboratory Services in the country for testing. And hence you see now we're starting to have most of the people tested, because previously there was just that lack of that gap. The capacity was not enough to cope with this pandemic. As you know, that there's a TB, as you rightfully said, TB and other related diseases like HIV/AIDS. Those are some of the things that really incited us to invest about 27.1 million into this initiative, which we think it will go a long way. And we're really even thinking opening this thing up to the region itself.
Now, in terms of building capacity, where does private money come in? I mean, the other day here on the channel at CNBC Africa, we were interviewing the head of Volkswagen here in South Africa, who said they turned over some of their production capacity to making ventilators, which we're still going through testing. But is there enough of it going on right now, bearing in mind the difficult days we're in?
Yes, Chris, we through our chief executive had engagement with this automotive industry, and their commitment, actually they live into their commitment of beginning to uplift the access to ventilators and really beginning to produce much more of the ventilators. But government also has started an initiative which they call a national ventilator program. That is basically, again, in an attempt to get the country ready with regards to the production of the ventilators. So the Volkswagen and all these other guys have really pledged their capacity in changing part of their production lines to deal with such aspects. So that processes are in motion, and I think we're yet to see, quite a number of these ventilators hitting the market and also hitting the hospitals where it's mostly needed. And on the other side, we also then, again invested about 6.9 million with the CSIR again to try and deal with the non-invasive ventilators, which we then call the CPAPs. We call them the positive airway pressure, ventilators. So that again, we're looking at ramping up the production of that in view of making sure that down the line, because the statistics shows that we might require that 1 ventilator is to 4 people. And again, if we look at the way the pandemic is projected to then have an impact, you might find yourself that you require